Hello and welcome fellow motorsports fans. We may have had a bit of a more quiet single-seater week, but this means we can take our time to make this a little bit of an F1 Academy special. But of course we also had a bunch of different Formula 4 action and a bit of karting, so let's get right to it. There was quite a bit of karting I could have covered for this weekend, but to be honest, there isn't enough time to focus on all of them. So instead we will focus on the German National Championship, the DKM, because this one really deserves to be covered properly, to be honest. I really wish I could have covered this and the other important karting championships throughout the entire year. I really should have done so, because I really notice now that it's difficult to give you a feel for the storylines playing out with the very limited time by just covering the last couple of rounds, because yeah, this was in fact the last of 6 rounds, and as is tradition we begin with the slowest ones, the mini championship DMKM, and here it is Milan Rossi. I have talked about him already, who has ended the season like he's begun it, really, by dominating the entire weekend more or less. A tiny bit more competition from Gustav Christensen in particular this time out, but still he won every single superheat of the year and he won every single final of the year. So this is about as dominant as it gets. I do still want to highlight his front-running competition, in particular 3 names. Yes, I've just said Gustav Christensen, he was proper competition this time out. Then there was also Carlos Nice. The pair had a really good scrap for P3. But really the guy I want to highlight is sort of the emerging youngster of the pack, Devin Titz. Now, time will tell if his name goes over well with the English audience, I'm not so sure, but either way he is really quick. It's only his 2nd year of racing period and he took a comfortable P2 here and has really been the guy to watch in terms of like a consistent upwards trajectory, if that makes sense. So no doubt he'll be a key player in the next season. Onwards to the juniors, the DJKM, and unfortunately this is a pretty weak field. They use OKJ rule set, so I suppose that's cool, but apparently also too expensive to attract proper grids. And we also know from 2 key reference points, namely Aminkara Osman and Luke Kornder, that the grid isn't particularly strong, because these two are among the front runners when competing here in Germany, even though they skipped this particular round. But whenever they are on the European stage, they are basically out in the pre-final at best. So really not the strongest grid all around. But I do still want to highlight season winner Moritz Gronek. He has won the season pretty convincingly. He's secured the title last round already. So if there's a name to watch out for in this lot, it's him. Then, and now this is key to understand about the German National Karting Championship, we have 2 different shifter classes, both racing KZ2 machinery, but basically it's just a 2-tier system, right? So we have the DSKC, the 2nd tier, and this is where a couple young guns compete. Well, actually quite a lot of young guns, but a couple ones that might become relevant in Formula Racing at some stage, at least one can hope. And here there's Maximilian Schleimer, who has secured the title with a decent lead at the very least. That's what it looked like. The points system in this is an utter mess. I hope I can even show them to you here, because there isn't a proper Wikipedia-esque table for this. But either way, it is very difficult to follow. It looks like he is even on points with Claudia Henning, but at the same time they said he even secured the title after the superheat. So I'm not entirely sure what's going on here. Karting point system are a tiny bit of a mess at the best of times, and this is more so than average. Either way, he may have secured the title in the superheat, but he's still only had to settle for P3 in the final after getting caught up in a bit of a battle for P3. Instead it was Claudia Henning and young Dutchman Enzo Bol, the 16-year-old and rookie in the class, I might add, who were battling more or less start to finish for the win, and in the end Bol did actually steal the lead from Henning with a pretty ballsy move and subsequently secured the win, so very nice job there. And this also meant he could steal P3 in the championship from one of the female competitors I'm really looking out for, Emma Felbermeier. We've talked about her in a different video. Last but not least, for a quick karting update, we do have the top level, the DKM, the category named just like the series itself, really the top shifter class, and this one isn't particularly relevant for us feeder series fans, in the sense that most of these competitors are a little older and probably won't have a future in Formula Racing at all. but it is still the top level competition, and we had a really curious thing playing out at the final. And here I asked you guys, did anyone watch this and or maybe was at the track and knows what went on? Because I couldn't figure it out. There wasn't an article posted yet, at least at the time of recording this, because we had a Maranello SRP team dominating as they tend to do at Wackersdorf. In particular, their ace driver Markus Kajak, the young Estonian, well, early 20-year-old Estonian, and he was dominating the entire weekend. He was dominating the final, was gapping the pack by like 5-ish seconds, only to then disappear with 1 lap to go. And he wasn't on the podium or anything, but in the final results after the race, he was then actually scored as the winner, which also meant he didn't just steal the race win or got a race win, which he didn't get on track apparently. But this then also meant he actually got the title instead of defending champ Stan Pax. So really quite a big controversy, confusion. I don't even know what the correct term is here. So if any of you know what went on there, please let me know. Either way, I just wanted to include this bit because the DKM is really fun to watch. If you want to check out some top level karting competition outside of the European stuff, then this might be worth a watch, even if the commentary is only in German and done by a guy who speaks at like 0.5 the time normal people speak at. So just turn up the playback speed to 2-speed and you'll be good to go. Anyway, let's talk about car racing. We begin with the Japanese Formula 4 Championship, and unfortunately here we barely had any green running over the weekend, which just comes with the territory of racing in shit weather. The first race was, heavily interrupted by safety cars and only had like 3-ish proper racing laps, and then the second race never really got going because of the weather and is postponed as far as I understand it. Interestingly, for the championship, all 4 front runners, so Horachi, Nomura, Shimizu and Moriyama, all have scored very low throughout the weekend, and instead it was Yuki Sano, the guy who won the season opening race, who actually scored double pole and the 1 win he could actually get. So his first time back on the podium after the season opener, quite a curious case there. But as I said, the entire weekend didn't make a whole lot of sense, so I really wouldn't read into it too much. Instead, we had a properly exciting season finale over in the Central European F4 Championship. Despite a very tiny grid at the Austrian round at the Salzburgring, only 8 cars signed up to it, and then old Kutska, I think it's pronounced, binned it hard during practice, so only 7 cars actually racing. Nonetheless, we saw some proper on-track action. The championship fight itself was definitely an uphill battle for Kirill Kutskov, trying his very best to keep the title fight alive against overwhelming favourite Oscar Wurz, and he couldn't quite do it. He won the first race after an epic race-long duel against Oscar Wurz, so that was really good to watch. And then, Wurz gave him the opportunity he needed by stalling it off the line in the second race. And Kutskov did what he had to do, dominated the race, but Oscar Wurz also did what he had to do, worked his way back through the pack to claim P2 ahead of teammate Karan, and this then meant he still secured the title with 1 race to spare. Very unfortunate for Kirill Kutskov in this sense, but he still went on to complete a perfect weekend with a triple, so he very much ended his season on a positive note. In terms of the implications for this, I do have to say Oscar Wurz obviously looked very quick all season long, but it isn't a great grid, and he definitely made quite a few big errors, like for example the stalling on the grid here. And it definitely feels like he was often just saved by the weak grid, which meant even when you do a mistake, you can recover so high up the order consistently. Now, it's not super important for the championship fight. And we also obviously have to add that presumably Kirill Kutskov is fighting in weaker machinery, given the Mafia Racing has never really done anything outside of this championship, whereas Genza is of course vastly experienced, brings decent cars to F4 grids consistently, so I would reckon Kirill Kutskov was probably outgunned quite a bit. The teammate performances would support this theory, so in that sense I do think Kutskov looked like the best of the drivers on this grid. At the end of the day, I also want to highlight the other big part of this championship, which is all the local talent coming through, and in particular, obviously, Max Karan and Miroslav Mikash, even though the latter was not participating this weekend. Those two were my highlights as like local breakout talents, and I do think this is like time for proof of concept for this series. Will these guys actually end up anywhere next year? Can they maybe pick up an extra sponsor they need to, you know, try their hands at like an Italian F4 or Spanish, something a little bit more competitive to show what they're actually made of? Because it looks like, yeah, they're at least like capable racing drivers, although obviously we wouldn't expect them to be like world beaters or anything. We do have a couple other highlights over the course of the season, and since the Central European F4 probably doesn't deserve its own review video, this sort of serves as said review video, and I want to highlight the debuts from both Philippe and Jean-Paul Carras, the French drivers, as well as in particular obviously Austrian Simon Schranz. We've talked about him last time out, and here again he really is looking like best of the rest driver in this pack already, despite it only being his second weekend in an unproven team as well. So I am really looking forward to see what he can do with his full season assault next year. And yeah, just overall I have to say it is a cool little series. It is very well produced for what it is, which I mean, at least as a fan, that's quite important to me. And it appears to be like a decent, cheap-ish opportunity to get started in the car racing world. In particular, I do like that we have lots of underrepresented nationalities competing in the series, which is always a fantastic sight. I do have to say it would do really well with like one other big team bringing 3 or 4 cars to the table and some experience, just so Genza has some proper competition outside of the one round that PHM decided to do over the course of the year. Then the third of the F4 series competing, we had British F4. In case you're the kind of person that doesn't know what to write in comments, you can just write "thank you Wes," because he enables me to actually watch these races to then review them for you. So there we go. Degean Fairclough, obviously overwhelming title favorite, has been throughout the season, and he now clinched the title not just with 1 round to go, but also with another 2 races to spare, because he actually secured it after dominating the first race at Silverstone. Very great stuff there. Obviously no real surprises. He was the man to beat. He was set up entirely to win this title. That was the only objective, and he got it. And crucially, he is breaking all the records he can break along the way. This is really crucial because, yeah, he is a lot more experienced than most of his competitors, but he isn't just winning, he is utterly dominating. Unfortunately, the second race never really happened. We got denied by the weather gods, much like in the Japanese F4. We only had time for 1 aborted race start, which we'll get to in a second. But at least Fairclough did use the opportunity to absolutely dominate the soaking wet third race yet again. He is truly great to watch at the moment. I do just want to have a little throwback, a reminder to the beginning of the year, in case you're active on the Feeder Series subreddit, where actually his girlfriend's dad asked on Reddit if we think he can make it to F1, essentially, which I think was a very funny thing considering where he stands right now and where he was at the beginning of the year. It is at least looking more realistic than it was 12 months ago, let's just put it this way. Then, debut watch, as we tend to do late in the season. We had Thomas Behrman once again doing his now second weekend in car racing. And I do have to say, it was pretty decent, better in quali than I may have expected, although obviously driving the dominant high-tech machinery as well, so, you know, difficult to judge. Either way, unfortunately, he had a poor first race, which fair enough, and then he had his car destroyed in the aborted second race during the start because he got utterly wrecked on the grid, and thus he couldn't really start the third race, which means we can't draw any conclusions from this weekend. Then we have a new female competitor on the grid, Emily Cotty, who is, you know, it's great to have more girls on the grid, but from the very few things I've seen from her in the British Karting Championship, she is like very mediocre in a national karting championship, so not exactly a huge prospect. I wouldn't really expect anything, but of course this means she can only, you know, surprise us positively, I suppose. She was nowhere this weekend, but obviously mid-season debut in tricky conditions, all the caveats, no judgment there. We did have a really positive debut though, and that was from Harry Reynolds, who, you know, fair enough, he's the only one of the trio with previous proper experience in cars. And yeah, he did an excellent job to score P7 in both the races that actually finished. Clearly a guy with some sort of budget issues, because the last time I've seen him race was during a half season of GB4 last year, which went reasonably well, but he then still aborted. So definitely struggling for budget, but yeah, I would say he made the most of the opportunity he got here. Last but not least, quick shout out to Yahoo Fu, who we've made a little bit of fun of him during the winter, because obviously, yeah, he's been one of these just overwhelming back markers, and he's been absolutely nowhere in the British F4 Championship as well, to be fair. But he did have a pretty sweet wet weather drive in the third race here to actually finally secure his first point of the year in P10. So congratulations, and it shows that there's at least a little glimpse of promise of a better future ahead for the guy. And then, last but not least, in the slow machinery, we had F1 Academy in Singapore, which, by the way, can I just say, it's a bit of a weird location to choose for an F4 level series, you know, just for cost-related reasons. But just for entertainment purposes, I think this is absolutely brilliant to put these cars on that track. I would have actually expected them to, you know, race a little better. I would have, you know, thought an F4 car can produce decent races around almost anywhere, but turns out, yeah, around Singapore, even the F4 car struggles to put on a good show. Although, of course, maybe this grid doesn't feature the most aggressive drivers that can create moves out of nowhere. There is a little bit of a lack of that throughout the grid, I would say. Obviously, we have Abby Pulling continuing her domination. At this point, this shouldn't surprise anyone, but there are a couple key storylines playing out behind her that are actually important to watch, in my opinion. We begin with every feeder series fan's favorite category, Premier Watch. And here we have Dorian Part actually not just not really challenging Abby Pulling, but crucially, she is now getting beat by Maya Weug, which, listen, before the season, I would have expected Maya to put up more of a battle, and that didn't really work out at all so far. And then, yes, obviously, she did step up her game considerably for the last round, and here she was looking really on it. Let me show you this battle here, taking P2 from Dorian Pan, not just in quali, but actually in a nice battle off the line in the second race. So really, now she is looking like the Maya Weug we would have expected coming into the season, and I am really happy about it. Meanwhile, the third of the drivers, Tina Hausmann, had a bit of a shockingly underwhelming weekend, and truth be told, she's had a bit of a shockingly underwhelming year so far, but the second race here in particular was just horrendous, just spinning, ending up in the wall, all sorts of issues, miles behind the pack. So I am really wondering if she can bounce back next year or if she'll just be out of the category altogether. I hope she stays around. Going into the season, I expected her to be really good actually, at least compared to the grid obviously, and she's in a Premier, so I had pretty high hopes for her to be in like the top 5 or something, and certainly wouldn't have expected her struggling to score points every single time. The big story, even though the media may have made it a little bigger than it actually was, is Lia Block now actually looking like a proper good racing driver compared to the rest of the grid. It was by far her best weekend to date. She was properly clear from the pack in basically all of these races. Yes, she's not quite able to go with the lead trio, but being best of the rest at least puts her in prime position to come back vastly improved next season and actually fight at the front of this championship. We will obviously need to wait and see if she can replicate this performance, but if she'll keep this up until the end of the year, then she'll be one of the heavy favorites going into next season. It was a really good weekend to watch. That being said, there was an article linked on the Feeder Series subreddit talking about her and her potential future in F1 based on her finishing P4 in an F1 Academy race. And this is the sort of just hilarious garbage that probably sets back the effort to actually promote female drivers to F1 more than it helps, just because it's so outlandish and unrealistic that when we will actually have that one woman that looks like she might be ready for F1 in the near future, nobody will believe it outside of the people watching the races, because who can believe these headlines anymore? It's just garbage every single time. We've heard the same about like Bianca Bastimanti, for fuck's sake. What's the point? Please be realistic. I would love women like Lia Block, for example, to eventually work her way up, improve further in this series in another year, and, you know, race in F3. That's a good goal for like the not too distant future, for like 2 or 3 years. Race in F3, do what Sophia Flörsch does now, but do it better. This is the first hurdle that women need to take before we can even think about them in F1. Quick championship spotlight, it does deserve to be in there. The title is obviously basically decided, even if she doesn't quite have the trophy just yet. Weug could potentially challenge Dorian Parr for P2, but this is also highly unlikely. So the real duel is really just behind them, and this is a pretty interesting one on track as well, because it's Chloe Chambers versus Nerea Marti, and these two are fighting for best of the rest, not just in the championship, but often on track as well. Both teammates, obviously, so this is a pretty cool battle which we can hopefully watch in the rounds to come. Last but not least, spotlight on our wildcard driver, and we have talked about her a fair bit whenever we've talked about British F4, but obviously this time she wasn't competing because she was in Singapore. Ella Lloyd, and she is excelling, I would almost say, given her very little experience compared to most of her competitors here. Yes, driving the Prema, which obviously is at least like a top 2 car, it appears to be, but she was firmly in the mid-pack with, yeah, no front-running qualities displayed or anything, but I would say this is a very solid cameo appearance, and I do hope this sets her up for a full season attempt next year as well. And yeah, if we can get a couple more drivers like her and like Palmovsky maybe in this series next year, then I think we will actually slowly get the grid this series deserves to have, filled with young, ambitious women that actually have displayed talent so far in the past. Anyway, that was it with slow cars. Let's talk about F1. Formula 1 this weekend was a really curious case, in my opinion, because we simultaneously had Lando Norris with by far, inarguably, his most dominant win so far, his first ever properly dominant win in Formula 1, and at the same time it looked super messy and just not particularly well executed from Norris, and it looked like he was relying on driving the rocket ship. Then again, Piastri couldn't quite match the same level of performance, so this was a really interesting case to sort of what do we make of this regarding Norris's potential qualities as a championship caliber driver, because I think this was a bit too messy for a guy who should be dominating just cleanly given the conditions there. But at the same time, obviously, it's still his best ever performance. So I don't know, just let me know down in the comments what you made of this. I want to focus on everybody's new favorite rookie on the grid, Franco Colapinto, with a really sweet early race move past teammate Alex Albon. And this one I wanted to highlight just because it shows he is really not afraid to show what he's capable of. I like the mindset he is clearly coming into this F1 stint with, because he knows he's only got a very limited time to make an impression, and it looks like he is using this opportunity to its fullest. And obviously, yeah, he is already being thrown into the conversation with Bottas and Bortoleto too, who might take this last Audi seat. In my opinion, I think it's okay if he just sits out a year as a reserve driver for Williams, and then we'll see where he can end up. But of course, if he gets a couple more of these performances here, I think it's almost inevitable that he could end up in the seat, just because teams like going with the proven option over a gamble driver. Anyway, again, let me know your opinions about this down in the comments, and otherwise I'll thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.